Hey Lake Point, Pastor Michael here to get you caught up on the 7th week of our series, Faith That Works. It's a series where we're taking a look at the writings of Jesus' half-brother, James. Why? Because we want a faith that is practical and meaningful, a faith that actually works. And James provides us with a framework for just that. This week, we're exploring a faith that helps you tame your tongue. Did you know the average person has 27 conversations per day? 1/5, 20% of your entire life will be spent talking. In any given year, you're going to fill 66 books of 800 pages just by your words. The average number of daily words spoken by a woman is 20,000, and the average number of daily words spoken by a man is 7,000. Why do I share those fun facts with you? Well, this week, Nate talked all about the power of our words and the challenge of controlling our tongue. In James chapter 1, verse 26, he writes this. He says, "If you claim to be religious, but you don't control your tongue, you are fooling yourself, and your religion is worthless." What is James saying? He's saying that if your faith doesn't help you tame your tongue, then it's not a faith that really works, because a faith that works helps you in every area of your life. And so Nate walked us through 3 powerful reasons why we need God's help to tame our tongue. First up is our tongue determines our direction. It determines the direction of my life. It determines where I'm headed, where I'm going. Our words have tremendous influence and control over our lives. Think of it this way. The words that have been spoken over you, good or bad, that you have received determine often who you are. And the same is true for the words we speak. Someone once said that we shape our words and then our words shape us. Now, we often overlook the power and influence of our tongue because our tongue is such a small little thing and our words seem so trivial. But look at what Pastor James says about this. In James chapter 3, verse 3, he says, "We can make a large horse go wherever we want by means of a small bit in its mouth." I mean, think about that. You've got a strong 2,000-pound stallion, an incredibly powerful animal that's being controlled by a 95-pound jockey. How is he doing it? Through a tiny metal bit in that horse's mouth. It's amazing. And then James says this next in verse 4. He says, "And a small rudder makes a huge ship turn wherever the pilot chooses to go, even though the winds are strong." I mean, imagine a giant ship in the ocean being battered by the winds and the waves, and yet it still heads in the right direction because of a tiny rudder. That's the power of our tongue. Our words are like a rudder. They have the power to keep us on course or, of course, drive us off course. What is James saying? He's saying that our tongue is the steering wheel of our life. It determines our directions. It's small, yet it's very, very powerful. The second thing that we learned from Pastor James is that our tongue has the power to destroy. We often think that in order to destroy something or someone, we need like a baseball bat or a sledgehammer or maybe a gun, but James describes an even more destructive thing than those things. And when he writes this in verse 5, he says, "The tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire." The parallel that James is making is this, that just like a careless camper can burn down an entire national park, a careless word can destroy an entire life. Things like gossip and rumors are like fire. They spread quickly and they wreak havoc. How? Because our words have the power to set things ablaze. James says we can burn people with the words that we speak. He goes on and in verse 6 he says, "And among all the parts of the body, the tongue is a flame of fire. It is a whole world of wickedness corrupting your entire body. It can set your whole life on fire, for it is set on fire by hell itself." As you can see, James does not beat around the bush when it comes to how our tongue has the power to destroy. He uses very vivid language. He goes on to say in verses 7 and 8 that people can tame all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and fish, but no one can tame the tongue. It is restless and evil and full of deadly poison. As Nate shared, the writers of Scripture over and over again warn us against negative speech like James because it's so destructive. And to help us know what we need to avoid, Nate provided us with 7 examples of destructive speech that the biblical authors outlined for us. And so Nate shared about gossip and slander and lying and crude jokes, sarcasm and cussing. And finally, he also talked about taking the Lord's name in vain. In the Ten Commandments, Moses tells us this. Exodus 20 verse 7, he says, "Do not use the name of the Lord your God in curses or silly banter. God won't put up with the irreverent use of his name." God's name is to be kept holy. We are not to reduce his name down to where it's just meaningless, where we flippantly use it in vain, saying things like, "Oh my God," or for God's sake. Doing so is destructive because it hurts our witness, it hurts our testimony, it robs God of the glory that he deserves. Friends, our words matter. Remember, Jesus said this in Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, on Judgment Day, you will give an account for every idle word you spoke. So, our tongue, as we looked at, determines our direction, and our tongue has the power to destroy. Also, our tongue reveals our heart. What James is going to tell us is that our tongue is the window to our heart, that our tongue, the words we speak, act like an x-ray or an ultrasound, and they reveal the true nature of what's going on inside of us. James writes this in chapter 3, verses 11 and 12. He says, "Does a spring of water bubble out with both fresh water and bitter water? Does a fig tree produce olives or a grapevine produce figs? No, and you can't draw fresh water from a salty well." James says you can't draw two different things from the same well. It's not like the first bucket you're going to draw is going to be like full of Pepsi, and your second bucket you draw is going to be full of sparkling water. It's either one or the other. Whatever's down in that well is going to be what comes up in that bucket. And so Jesus is recorded as saying, what you say flows from what is in your heart, which tells us that the root of our problem isn't here, it's here. You see, somebody with a harsh tongue, they reveal an angry heart. Somebody with a negative tongue, they reveal a fearful heart. Somebody with an unfriendly tongue reveals a hard heart. Somebody with a critical tongue reveals a bitter heart. Somebody with a boastful tongue, they reveal an insecure heart. And somebody with a filthy tongue reveals an impure heart. The problem isn't with our tongue. Ultimately, it's with our heart. And so the question you're probably experiencing, the question that Nate sought to answer was this, is, well, how do we actually tame our tongue? And so the first remedy is to invite God into your heart and into the words you speak daily. In fact, that's what praying is all about. It's about inviting God to rule and reign in your life, to be in control of your words and the words that you speak and the thoughts that you think. The second thing that we can do to tame our tongue is to guard what we actually allow into our heart. Remember, James says that our heart is the wellspring from which our mouth speaks. And so we need to protect our hearts so that they're not becoming polluted. We need to have filters in place to protect what goes in through our eyes and in through our ears. Lastly, if we're going to tame our tongue, we need to make an intentional decision and decide to speak words of life. Words that don't destroy but bring life, which are words of affection, words of praise and affirmation, words of encouragement, words of healing, and of course, words of faith. Well, friends, consider yourselves caught up. Enjoy working through this discussion questions and hopefully speaking of words of life to your fellow group members. We'll see you next time.